So obviously I've been on a bit of a Chainsaw Man binge as of recently in terms of content, which I do apologize for. I know there's not much variety, but hopefully within the following weeks, I have more stuff out for different series. I've just been having a lot of fun talking about Chainsaw Man. I felt inspired, or maybe more so motivated, just to talk about more specific things for that series. Because there tends to be a lot of confusion with Chainsaw Man, with Denji, with a bunch of its characters. And while I have explained or talked about, or at least given my perspective of what Chainsaw Man's story truly is, what the narrative is indicative to, there's only so many bits and pieces that I can kind of give a fresh perspective for, which is pretty much the big reason why I enjoyed making my Denji or Chainsaw Man Can Never Love video, or even the Kobeni video, just to shed a portional focus spotlight on this specific thing, on this person, on this concept, or maybe what they uphold. So to kind of end off the Chainsaw Man oriented content, I wanted to take away that focus, or at least the very specific pinpointed focus, and step back a little bit and broaden it for the devils of Chainsaw Man, more specifically Chainsaw Man Part 2, and the overall attention that we're most likely going to get towards them. I really enjoyed the concept for devils within Chainsaw Man. It's very simple, it's very to the point and on the nose, and it's fears taking a physical representation and being or becoming more powerful, equating to the amount of people that actually fear it. So if the entirety of the planet, every single person feared one thing, and only one thing, this one devil would be born, and it would be the most powerful being to ever exist. That's a scary sight to behold, and funny enough, we have seen very slight versions of that. I give it those parameters or that frame because it over-escalates the entire thing. It makes it very drastic. If every single person on Earth only feared one thing, this devil would be godly. It'd be universal. But because people fear more than one thing, that fear isn't as focused. It's shared between a whole different things, and it gives birth to a litany of different things. A very straightforward concept, but one that can be utilized extremely well and has been utilized extremely well. But I am more excited to see some of the newer variations for it within Chainsaw Man Part 2. And the Gun Devil is a prime example of the universal fear towards guns. It's not a primordial fear, but you probably could definitely argue that its power is close to or of equal to a primordial fear. Maybe on the lower end, but we don't really have anything to gauge that in terms of another primordial fear. We've only seen one of them. The differences between the Gun Devil and the primordial fear that we have seen, which is the Darkness Devil, is not only their presentation, how Fujimoto has captured their tone or the atmosphere that they bring across and the fear that they induce, but also the kind of innate reasoning behind that fear. When it comes to very specific details or semantics regarding the statistical fear towards something, we don't necessarily know. I guess you could say it's more inherent fear, like a phobia. Something you're scared of to your core is going to be more powerful and create something more powerful compared to something that is more so within the moment, like guns per se. You can be scared of guns, but it's not going to stop you from sleeping, or it's not going to stop you from doing your everyday life. Whereas if you're scared of the darkness per se, that is a inner core fear that's going to stop you from functioning a good portion of your life, depending on how scared you are, avoiding the nighttime, avoiding dark places, and just constantly somewhat thinking about it. So that's probably kind of my hypothetical statistics on what differentiates between a very powerful devil like the Gun Devil and a primordial fear like the Darkness one. But you'll notice as well, just visually, they're completely different, of course, but the amount of attention or the overwhelming nature that the Darkness Devil brings across is entirely different. And don't get me wrong, the Gun Devil's introduction is beautiful. It's tragic, it's chaotic, it is what you would expect from something everyone fears. The utter destruction or chaos that guns bring across. The darkness is exactly what you think it is. It is pure abyss, suffocating pitch blackness, and you don't know what is within that very swirling dark area. It could be anything. but every single person that encountered the darkness devil, the primordial fear, got absolutely obliterated. These are devils that cannot be competed with lightly. Devil hunters could not do anything. Makima could not do anything. It was only by her being intelligent that she was able to escape from that place. But she could not rival it within power. She could not control it because these are devils that are globally feared. And only a very tiny portion of the darkness devil ingested by another devil turn them into someone pretty powerful. So what else is out there? In terms of primordial fears, what else could there be? There is a lot of different ways that this could go. Because of the hypothetical statistics, there's a lot of different phobias or fears that you could throw in between. If you try and just look up primordial fears, it's not going to give you darkness. It's going to give you more human orientated or natured stuff. Extinction, mutilation, bodily invasion, loss of autonomy, separation, abandonment, rejection, humiliation, shame, or worthlessness. These are kind of the core fears of humans, right? Now, any one of these could easily be a primordial fear, and I wouldn't be surprised if maybe one or two of them are, but because dark is more something in revolving to its environment, what you grow up with, and is kind of a result or product of the environment and how you're raised. I think some of the other ones would be a little bit more appropriate and fit in line with the darkness devil. So these are still very high class and genuine fears, but kind of take the best of core human fears, but also stuff that is a product of your environment, learning, growing, etc. So the fear of being alone, pretty self-explanatory. With these, you can also imagine the artistic value that Fujimoto could bring across regarding them. Very creative and could be very scary to witness. The fear of connecting, the fear of being abandoned, the fear of self-assertion, the fear of lack of recognition, the fear of failure and success, the fear of being fully alive. These are definitely partially existential, stuff that isn't necessarily a phobia and more corely driven. There's a lot of complexity within them, there's a lot of creativity within them, but still maybe Fujimoto doesn't want to do that. Maybe he just wants to play on a handful of them. There's a lot of different variations there. So coupling phobias and fears like darkness and the fear of fully being alive may be jarring, but understandable in the grand scheme of things. The real bread and butter of this conversation, though, primordial fears that actually inhibit some sort of response and also could be just as creatively designed: arachnophobia, acrophobia, the fear of heights. Actually, I'm not even going to try and pronounce all of these because I just realized the words are extremely difficult. The fear of flying, fear of enclosed spaces, fear of insects, fear of snakes, fear of dogs, fear of storms, fear of needles. Already this is probably ticking your boxes of stuff that Fujimoto could do, because you would put the darkness devil more so along these lines. And you can imagine just how insane any sort of concept for these would be. I'm sure he's going to mix and match and kind of play upon whatever he feels comfortable with in regards to Chainsaw Man Part 2, and I'm hoping we get to see a good showcase of them. Considering the tone of Part 2 should be entirely different, at least with how he wants to approach it and what he wants to tell and what he wants to showcase, we could see some very beautiful and eye-opening understandings towards these certain fears or phobias, which I couldn't be more excited for. But obviously, if we're talking about Part 2, primordial fears and devils in general, we have to mention the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which is something that was brought in kind of more so towards the end of the story, thanks to Makima, thanks to what Denji is, or should I say Chainsaw Man, and the history of Chainsaw Man. So right above the primordial fears, there's another tier, which is kind of like global things you don't want to happen, but happen pretty much every single day. This would be conquest, war, famine, and death. The top of the top. Now, we have not necessarily seen what these devils are. However, we do have some sort of example, or at least a variation of an example, to give you an idea, and that is Makima. See, throughout the story, we don't know if Makima is considered a horseman because her name isn't indicative to being just control. There's actually a lot of translation, I don't want to say issues or problems, but to put simply, with the way the Japanese language works, there's a lot of different meanings or readings for words that can't necessarily be translated properly. So So while it does translate to control devil, the reading or the meaning for it may be entirely different, which we don't get that emphasis. There is a very high possibility that Makima is one of those 4 horsemen and she just does not remember, or she's the human embodiment of it. Conquest. Also, ironically, what Makima is also translated to. Control, conquest, conqueror, they're all somewhat baselined the same. So if Makima could potentially be the human embodiment of one of the horsemen, which is conquest, what about war, famine, and death? If these 3 individuals don't get a human variation, I just assume we're going to see the devils themselves, the concept or the energy that they uphold. I would like to see their human variation just because we have the primordial fears and that kind of balances it out. It'd be very scary for Denji to deal not only with a primordial fear, then have to deal with a very human version of death or famine or war. There's obviously a litany of ways that Fujimoto could play upon it, but the more I talk about it, the more excited and interested I truly am. The primordial fears is one thing, and I 100% believe we're going to get a good showcase of at least a handful of them, if not all of them. But the 4 horsemen is a little bit different. There may be a little bit more finesse to what they uphold and how they're represented within the story. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to see the absolute insanity that war, famine, or death would be creatively induced to, how it would be brought across within the story and how it would be tiers above technically primordial fears. But because of how crazy primordial fears were, I wouldn't also be surprised if he tries to put the 4 horsemen into its human variation or its counterpart, and Makima just could be the first stepping stone for that, a being that doesn't actually remember or acknowledge that they are one of those 4 horsemen, even though she herself fought against them and Denji. But even then, the way she described it was filled with a little bit of uncertainty. You could also kind of take her describing it as her being a horseman fighting Denji. In terms of specifics or details, I'm not entirely sure, but I am very excited to see what Fujimoto does with his devils, with his primordial fears, and of course the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse within Chainsaw Man Part 2. So with that being said, that is basically it. Let me know what type of primordial fears you would want to see, because I'm sure there'd be some very interesting ones. Fear of water would be very interesting. A fear of the unknown or like space, that would be absolutely ridiculous. And how do you feel towards the 4 horsemen? Do you think they should be viewed as devils, which would make sense power-wise, but maybe you want to see a spin on it or a contradiction, which he loves doing, and putting the most powerful and feared things in the world into a human body? I'd love to hear your thoughts. But I want to thank you all for watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Drink plenty of water. New video every 3 days, and I will see you within the next one. Goodbye.